Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome everyone to another episode of All Things Policy. I'm Harshit Kukreja. Today as my guest I have Shambhavi. Hello Shambhavi, how are you?
Hi Harshit, I am well, thank you, and I hope all our listeners are well as well.
Yeah. So last week we were having a discussion about New Zealand's new smoking laws. It's a tobacco control bill. So the bill has been passed in the parliament and we thought it would be an interesting thing to talk about on the podcast. So last week New Zealand they had put this bill up last year and they passed it like 4 days ago. So what they are trying to do is they are trying to ban tobacco smoking in phases from 2023. So what they are trying to do is anybody born before 2008 will not be able to buy cigarettes or tobacco products in New Zealand, and they will increase the age every year. For instance, a 14-year-old boy in 2023 won't be able to legally buy tobacco products, and then in 2024 they'll increase the age to 15. So now that 14-year-old boy will never be able to buy any tobacco product. So this is an attempt to phase out tobacco from the country while not attempting to reduce tobacco usage in the existing users, not forcing them to leave tobacco. So yeah, this is basically the world's first law to ban smoking for the next generation. And what they've also done is first they've reduced the age, they've increased the age of buying tobacco. They have reduced the number of stores. They were about 6,000 to 600. And they have also lowered the nicotine content of smoked tobacco products as an attempt to reduce the sort of addictiveness of tobacco and tobacco smoking. So other countries are also attempting to make similar bills. Malaysia has also put a bill, and I think it has gone to some parliamentary committee for some reconsideration. But they're also trying to do a similar bill and create a new generation of smoking-free citizens. Yeah, so this is what they're trying to do. So Shambhavi, what do you think will be the implications and basically how does this pan out over the long run? What are the advantages and do you think this will be successful?
Right, thanks Harshit. I think what New Zealand has done, I think if you just look at this particular piece of legislation in isolation, it comes as very shocking. It has basically banned anyone born after 2008 to ever buy cigarettes in New Zealand. So you could be 40 years old and at some point of time in your life and you still won't be able to buy a cigarette. If you look at that single piece, it looks shocking, it looks stunning. But what New Zealand has done is it has staggered its anti tobacco legislation over the past many years. And it has actually managed to do this along with education, increasing taxes, and a whole host of other measures, right? So when you look at the entire anti tobacco policy that New Zealand has brought out, this is one step in a ladder to be smoke free. That's the purpose and the end point that New Zealand policymakers envision for New Zealand is that there should not be anybody smoking or a very minuscule number of people smoking in New Zealand. Whether it will be successful or not, we'll have to wait and see what they have managed. I mean, they have really low levels of smoking, anyways, 8%. And they hope that through this legislation, it goes down to 5%. And obviously, going on any further is going to be the marginal cost of going down more is going to be pretty high. But I think if they want to achieve that kind of minuscule levels, this might actually work out because they have managed to reduce levels quite significantly in both the Maori and the non-Maori populations of New Zealand through legislation, through taxing, through education. They did this whole bit on second-hand smoke. So New Zealand signed the Framework Convention on Tobacco Control, which is the WHO's first multilateral treaty on public health measures for tobacco back in 2003. And then they started off with campaigning on how secondhand smoke will impact children. They did one on pets. They brought in legislation banning smoking in cars. If you had under 18 passengers with you, obviously then public smoking. There's sports leagues signed on saying that some of our stadiums are going to be smoke free. So they have done a whole gambit of things to be able to curtail smoking. And this is, as part of this, I think this might work. There, what they have done is not said that we ban complete tobacco, right? So people are still allowed to vape, and we'll talk about that, Harshit, because I want to understand from your point of view as a clinician what you find vaping to be less risky as compared to smoking cigarettes. But they have provided those alternatives. They have provided subsidized nicotine patches, etc., for the past many years, right? So the alternatives exist. What they're trying to do is trying to curb the addiction itself by targeting youngsters and preventing youngsters from buying smoking. So they're not obviously, I think they can still, if they get a smoke, no one's going to be able to monitor whether under 18 years old are smoking or not because someone else has bought the cigarettes. So there is that risk of that. This is nothing, I think, is a full measure against smoking. But in terms of the way they have approached this, I quite appreciate what New Zealand is trying to do. Obviously, attaining 100% success rates is going to be very, very difficult. But I think that they are doing much better in terms of tackling smoking, recognizing it as a harm, and doing something about it than ad hoc legislation that some other countries come up with. So, India, for example, Harshit, you know very well, we have banned vaping, but not smoking. As a clinician, what do you think about vaping versus smoking?
Yeah, so when vapes started coming out, basically cigarettes and all kinds of these electronic methods of aerosol generation for nicotine and everything, so they have less effect on your health as compared to cigarettes. But they do, as when they came out, the impression was that they're very less harmful than cigarettes. That is not the case. They have their own harms, and although it is considerably less than cigarettes, and it would be better for people who are not able to leave smoking to jump to vapes for some kind of getting your nicotine, and who are not able to kick the habit, but they are still quite harmful. And a lot of research came out while the COVID pandemic was in full swing, that especially teenagers who were hooked up to vapes and who were using vapes very regularly, they had bad respiratory outcomes. And at times, they were like not exactly on the same level, but on the same league as smokers, as chronic smokers. So there is still research coming out. Earlier research pointed out that vapes were considerably very safe as compared to cigarettes, but now there's research which says that they do quite a lot of harm. But because logically it also makes sense, because they don't have all the substances which come with the tobacco in it. So all the things which are attached to nicotine. So they are considerably safer, but not as safe as we thought them to be. And even earlier, what it was that people who are not able to kick the habit should switch to vapes. But there is now a large percentage of the population which is taking up vaping as a new habit because they think it's much safer. And smoking has, this is all anecdotal and everything, smoking has become to be less cooler, and vaping is the new cool thing to do.
Now see who Harshit has been hanging out with. But Harshit, so let us just clarify this, right? So nicotine is the addictive part of tobacco and vaping, and then the harmful chemicals extra that come in addition is what is causing the cancers
Yeah,
and other health impacts, right? Yeah, which is why nicotine patches, etc., are given as substitutes when you're trying to kick the habit. And what New Zealand is trying to do is, okay, we have people who are addicted, but and we will try to manage them, but we don't want any new people being addicted. That's the kind of approach that they are taking.
yeah. They are trying to like prevent the new people from joining in. And if you don't join in, then there's no sort of, there's no question of like getting you off cigarettes and everything. So India tried to jump the bandwagon and say that, oh, so vaping is harmful, let us try and ban it. So the ban has not been successful. At least you can get it very easily at prominent places, and they're like shops with displayed, and a lot of people are able to procure it. And maybe I think it was a it would have been helpful for at least as legal as cigarettes are. It would have been helpful to people who have been trying to kick the habit. So
Yeah.
cigarettes are the worst, and vapes are maybe you can call them less bad. So
Yeah, I
there's
think
a categorization.
when the law came in, it seemed to be very reactionary to things that was happening in the US, where we suddenly had those few deaths again because of vapes which were manufactured with defects, and that is something that is bound to happen if you don't have regulation. Because I mean, we see this with again with smoking, we will see this with most addictive things. Is that there will be an underground market that will prosper if you put in any sort of very stringent legislation. This is something that New Zealand will also have to deal with, as it makes its laws more stricter to kind of curb the remaining 8% of people who are still smoking, right?
Yeah. So
So that underground market will. I mean, and 2 days ago we had this, or yesterday we had news about another huge tragedy in Bihar
yeah.
with people drinking illicit liquor. But again, if you prohibit something that has been addictive and people are addicted to for a long time, a sudden kind of stop doesn't work. So I mean, New Zealand is, I think, is a bit better off because they're an island of, so they might have better land control measures. But even for them, for anybody, just suddenly prohibiting something that a mass of your population is addicted to will cause a mushrooming of an underground market, right?
So India's laws were at that time there were some articles which had pictures of teenagers on ventilators, and there were a few cases, and causation was not very clear, and it was sort of a bad addictive substance which is now reaching our shores, which has already wrecked the United States teenagers. We should prevent it, and they banned it. And even in the case of New Zealand, so New Zealand has banned cannabis for a long time, and it is still the fourth most used substance after caffeine, tobacco, and alcohol. So this is government of New Zealand data, which says that around 12 to 13% of the, this is one survey they did, have used cannabis or cannabis products in the last 12 months. So even though they have banned cannabis from a long time, they have not been able to eradicate it fully. So, and for instance, in case of smoking, the decrease from somewhere around 11% to 8% over the last 2 3 years has also been has also seen an increase in the percentage of people using vapes. So that was somewhere around 6%, and now that has increased to 10 or 11%. And I don't think New Zealand had a smoking problem. Maybe this was their attempt to like eradicate tobacco from their nation, because OECD average was 16.517. So that was not such a huge issue. So what we are seeing is, accompanied by the drop, there's an increase in vapes, and New Zealand had a low smoking rate. So, Shambhavi, do you think this is an all-down attempt to like eradicate tobacco as a problem from the nation?
So
Like
it
it,
is, yeah, it is quite interesting. So they say they want smoke-free New Zealand, and then there's two ways you look at it, right? So there's smoking in public places, which obviously has harm for the person who's smoking, but also all of this secondhand smoke, which can cause health issues for people who are not signed up to smoking, right? And this was part of that framework convention on tobacco control, this is Article 8, which is basically on protection from exposure to secondhand tobacco smoke. And a lot of countries worldwide have signed up to this idea that we don't want to encourage passive smoking and have banned smoking in public places. But smoking at home, smoking without interfering in anybody else's life, monitoring that is going to be really, really difficult. Short of saying that we're going to ban all sales, I mean, they have reduced the number of shops that can sell cigarettes, anyways. But yeah, I mean, and cigarettes is just one form of tobacco. So, short of that, it is going to be very, very difficult to achieve that. And I think the bigger problem here is of whether the state should actually be attempting to do that. And I think the topic of consent and where the state should intervene is something that deserves a bigger discussion. So let's just take a break here, Harshit, and come back and talk about this.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Hello, listeners. Welcome back to the episode. So it's me and Shambhavi, and we were talking about the new New Zealand tobacco control law. So Shambhavi, we were talking about, should the state sort of interfere? Before we go into that question, we were talking about how a complete ban may lead to, if you cannot sort of monitor what people do in their own homes. So they have banned cannabis in a lot of forms. Still, there's considerable usage. So I don't think even a complete ban, maybe if they shut all the 600 shops, they'll be able to achieve anything lesser than, I don't know, maybe 5, 6, 7%. This is a estimate I've made. This is like very rough guesstimate, I would say. But I don't think they'll be able to go below that unless it is accompanied by long term behavior change. And I don't think this will be
Yeah,
possible.
I think some of the way we look at targets, particularly for addictive diseases, is eradication is just going to be impossible. I mean, I think we have to kind of accept that we want to keep it to a minimum level. I understand where we can say eradication of infectious diseases comes from, where that idea comes from. But stopping behavior of like completely changing behavior of everybody to stop smoking, to stop drinking alcohol, even sugar, right? Probably come talk about sugar at Harshit because that's the next big addictive thing that nobody seems to be even paying a lot of attention to. So changing all of that behavior is going to come at a really high cost. And then the risk of underground markets, the risk of people using ill manufactured or fraud substances. At that point of time, I think the risk will outweigh the benefit of trying to get those last 2 or 3% of people who still smoke. So I think that kind of fine balance has to be met when we are thinking of legislation. We are thinking of a target, at least for addictive substances, right? So I think that is going to be very critical for policymakers to think about. Yes, ideally, we would like everybody to be smoke free. I mean, I don't smoke, so it is easy for me to say that. But I do drink alcohol. And I think if tomorrow they came up and said no one should be drinking alcohol, I would say, hey, but I'm drinking alcohol responsibly. Why me? Right? So I think those kind of questions need to be tackled with. Again, for smoking, it is then if it is not causing a public health hazard, should the government be intervening? If it is a public health hazard because of passive smoking, because you have a very huge number of people in your country who are smoking, and that is causing issues because you're also sponsoring healthcare, etc., and taxpayer money are going into helping
Shambhavi,
people.
even then, we don't penalize people who don't exercise or who eat a lot of sugar. So,
Exactly.
so if you say that, if by that logic, I get your logic that people who smoke are a sort of a are causing more cost to the public health
Mm.
resources and everything. But that is the same logic for maybe, yeah, sugar we talked about, and
Mm.
maybe exercising. So if you
Mm.
say that, oh, you are not exercising 30 minutes every day, then you won't be able to access public health infrastructure or government hospital or something.
They were saying that if you have a very high percentage of people who are smokers and that is causing a burden to the healthcare system,
I think I framed my
then
response a little,
then there
yeah.
is a reason for a society to say that hey, we need to kind of tackle this position. And with that, I think sugar should also be a part of
Yeah, because sugar,
state
uh,
action. Yeah.
yeah,
But
if
I'm
you
not
look
saying that that means that you should ban sugar, right? Or
at,
that you should ban smoking. I'm saying that that's the reason for to do all of this taxing, education, campaigns, etc. Those kind of measures have to come in.
yeah, you can change behavior. Now, but I don't think the state has a very good stance and sort of regulating what a able-minded, sort of a consenting adult, not able-minded, consenting adult is able to like consume or do. That shouldn't be, unless, for instance, you spoke about public smoking, unless it has huge externalities to other people, then the state shouldn't interfere in such a way like banning something. They can obviously
Yeah,
try to change behavior
yeah, yeah.
and
That's
this
what I'm
is the
saying.
way.
Yeah, I agree with that. So again, so at 8% levels, and now with this assumed fact that there are going to be 5% levels in New Zealand, does New Zealand need to do more? Will doing more cause more harm than benefit is something that obviously they'll have to take stock of. But it is likely to because of the addictive nature of nicotine. And that's something that they will have to decide on how they want to like lay it out, right? The point is again, the consent of the individual is also very important. So we can't, unless there's a public health angle to it, we shouldn't really be bothering with state interventions because then that sets us down on a slippery slope on what other consents do we not require and where else can freedoms be curbed in the interest of public health.
Yeah, because yeah, that is a slippery slope. You wouldn't want the state to intervene in your personal life as such. And curb your freedoms, and yeah, that makes sense. But I think this is sort of a, should I call it misguided? Eventually, if they want to like bring it to like 2 or 3 or 4%, that would definitely have more harms than good. Because look at what we are doing in Bihar or Gujarat. So even if you have reduced the total percentage of people who consume alcohol, the harm on the people who are still doing it. For instance, if 20% of the population consumed alcohol regularly before the ban, now maybe 12% or 15%, any number you can take, 15% are still consuming. The quality of the alcohol they're consuming, is it safe to consume? Now the that all is causing a lot of harm. And because now there's also a loss in productivity because they have to alcohol trains which run from Bihar to neighboring states. Basically, the people who want to drink, they go in the morning, sit there, drink, and come back. So this has also been seen, and there's also a loss of revenue to the state because now it's illegal, and there's also a rise in crimes because now there's a parallel market. There's no state backing to that market. You cannot approach the criminal justice system. So there's an increase in violence because you also want to enforce your contracts and still get your still sell your product. So yeah, you have to take all of these things into consideration because you push such a law. Maybe New Zealand will do better than us because of their high state capacity and they're also a small nation. So, but I don't
No,
think
I
they'll
think
be
a lot of
able to achieve
Yeah, a
less
lot of
than
things are in
5%.
New Zealand's favor. I think, like you said, small nation. This campaign has been running for a long time. I think their first legislation against tobacco came in the 1990s, and they have been building on that, right? Again, through a whole host of measures that they've been trying to do, not just legislation, but again, campaigning, creating ads, co-opting leaders, etc. The other thing, obviously, is that they have neighboring landmasses, so perhaps they might be able to exert a little bit more control over what comes into the country. Third is they have a universal healthcare system, right? Which means that for them to understand if someone has smoking related disorders or diseases might be easier in their system than it would be for us. So if there is a increase of burden because of underground markets pushing in more bad quality things, they might be able to pick it up. And in that way, they might be able to understand the risks much better than we can in our system. Which means that they can then eventually play out, if they want to, with data, the benefit and health of what they're trying to achieve. Right. Yeah, I think 5% is a good target. Whether that happens at 2% or 3%, only data can tell, I guess. But I think the way that they have approached it is bringing it down slowly is much better than saying that, hey, we're just going to ban everything. We're going to target 0% right now, right? That is just going to cause a lot more problems that we see, right? And again, what we haven't seen in India is a huge focus and a huge investment in the other kind of, we have raised taxes, obviously. We do a bit of education about alcohol and the smoking. We now have those big, we have ads, which the notes that come when it's shown on in theater or on TV. We have the cancer pictures on the actual cigarettes packs, etc. So we are doing things, and those have to continue with a lot more focus. But we also have to start thinking, if India wants to go, is to look at those slabs and say we want to bring down smoking by so much percent, by so much percent, by so much percent, and what we need to do for that.
Yeah.
Because
So
again, zero is not going to be an achievable figure.
yeah, I don't think zero. So contrasting what the approach we were talking about and what India is taking. So I think a few people sadly lost their life through spurious liquor in Bihar, and the Bihar CM in the assembly said that this is the approach that we have now trying to take the moral high ground. He says that those who drink and lose their lives as a result deserve no sympathy and no compensation will be given. I get the no compensation part. Obviously, the state can decide it's an illegal thing, but it was still a tragedy, and it was basically the state's failure to not regulate alcohol coming into the state. And even when it was coming, so they're still they add, I think, methanol. In this case, also methanol would have been added to ethanol. So contrasting what we think would be a good strategy and what we think maybe New Zealand will take, and see how if there is a rise in smoking related sort of illnesses, they'll course correct or make changes. And what we as a country are doing. We are saying that, oh, so it's banned, you are still taking it. It's your problem, not our problem now. So this is the contrast between what we think is a good approach and what we are taking. So
Yeah, and then a lot is like weird, right? Like we ban loose BDs, where having loose cigarettes or BDs might
I think it's only loose cigarettes.
loose
BDs is
cigarettes. Sorry, BDs is right. So we ban loose cigarettes, and it doesn't make sense because then people are buying packs and smoking packs, which is not what you want, people to do.
yeah,
So I think we are kind of ignoring the biological aspect of this problem, which is addiction,
yeah,
and instead of focusing on the morality of, hey, you should not be doing this. And if you're addicted biologically, you are addicted. I mean, morality will figure out eventually, but yeah, going cold turkey, this is going to be very, very difficult.
yeah. Instead of
And
yeah,
I was saying,
instead
instead
of
of thinking of the bad effects of what you're doing and trying to focus on how you can mitigate those, we are focusing on nicotine, which is causing the addiction.
yeah, so instead of treating tobacco as a addiction problem, as a health problem, we are treating it as a vice. Like it's a bad thing to do. Stop doing it. There are a lot of factors which depend on addiction, which on which addiction depends. There are genetic factors, there are socioeconomic factors, there are your behavioral factors, there are whatever interactions you do with society. And on that loose cigarettes thing, so I think what they're trying to do is at least they are trying to achieve to remove not so like the smokers who only smoke like one, two, three cigarettes a day from that, and they're trying to reduce the sort of the lure of cigarettes. Maybe then you don't want to like go to a whenever you see a cigarette smoke shop, you cannot buy a packet, so you cannot buy loose cigarettes. So unless you want to like smoke a lot, you wouldn't buy a packet. But I think what you said makes more sense. Now people would be buying packets, and they'll say, yeah, so anyways I smoke one every day, it's better if I keep a packet. And when you have that easy access, at least earlier they had to like go down, find the shop, smoke, and then come back. Now when you have easy access, when you have 10 cigarettes in your pocket, you're more likely to smoke. And that legislation, that policy they're bringing, it also says that they want to ban airport smoking zones and everything. So they're still treating it this as a vice instead of a
Yeah,
addiction or a public health problem.
yeah, I think that sums us up, Harshit. I think we have been able to do it better for alcohol because we hasn't not we have been able better to do it. We have been better to think about alcohol because alcohol addiction and that is treated quite separately from people who drink alcohol occasionally. And at least from a health point of view, we have been able to segregate that and think about it. There are these policies where if you drink too much, the bartender can refuse to give you another drink because you're out of your control, etc. And all of these approaches have been developed. But I don't think we have been able to think about smoking from that point of view. That who is our target segment? Which is the segment we want to first be able to? We first want to reduce smoking in the entire population. Do we want chain smokers to reduce the amount of cigarettes they smoke? What has to be a strategy on decreasing this addiction to nicotine that we have not as public health but have not been able to put through in our legislation, right? So our laws are kind of treating it, as you very rightly say, as a vice and not as a public health.
Yeah, we are taking the fatherly, the parentalistic approach and sort of telling the citizens, no, you cannot do it. It's a bad thing to do. And not treating this as an addiction problem that it is. And yeah, I think maybe we need to rethink our policies. And even so the WHO also recommends that we increase the taxation on cigarettes. But in a country like India, where our state capacity is not that good, if you increase it too much, you will see sort of like black marketing of cigarettes from other places. So if across a state border or across a national border, the same cigarette is in one, for instance, in India it's like 100 rupees. In Bangladesh it's 50 rupees. So that's a 50 rupee margin, and that is a 50% margin. So a lot of people would be willing to like sneak in the cigarettes and sell it at a lower price.
Yeah, I think all of these measures have their own fine balance that has to be achieved. We can't over regulate either, we can't under regulate either. I think in India there's a bigger bigger conversation to be had, because obviously we have a we have to also consider the huge employment that the tobacco industry provides. So I think the aim has to be to reduce smoking to a minimum. But how we achieve that? How do we put in the entire host of measures so that it doesn't impact people who are employed in the industry, people who are smoking have safe ways of reducing their addiction or moving to less harmful forms of nicotine, etc., educating them about the harms of it, etc. I think it has to be a holistic kind of legislation. It can't be like one of ordinances or etc. that come in.
Yeah, so as we talk about all these like addictions and everything, so yeah, so the funny thought I had, in India, it's no use banning public smoking because there's so much air pollution that you can have.
Yeah, I see this from Delhi many times.
Yeah, it's no use. So even though I don't smoke, so at the peak, all the data said that I'm still smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So yeah, I was like, why? Oh, that is a much bigger problem for us to tackle than people smoking and doing all this. Yeah, because that has a lot more health harms. And I would like to add. So you said, I think our aim should be reducing not the number of people who smoke, but the harm caused by smokers. For instance, the harm caused by tobacco. For instance, if we are able to like reduce the harmful chemicals in cigarettes, and still they are selling at the same, or even like more people are using, maybe we can reduce the harm which is caused by smoking. And the harm reduction approach, I think, is the way to go.
Yeah.
So, listeners, thank you for chiming in. Shambhavi, thank you so much for joining, and this was a very interesting and fun conversation. Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ashita. I had fun too. Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is at IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.